Right, Story Seekers, we are back with the lovely Jan Foster, and we are going to ask some questions. Jan, there's no escaping it now.
Ooh.
There's nothing to be done
Ooh.
but answer. What is the first story you wrote which meant something to you?
Ooh. Well, that's a good question. First things first,
Best
I
stop
have
asking
to
it then.
say that I
That's not
have
the
the
idea.
world's worst memory. It has a 10-year cut-off point. So anything that happened
Oh,
10 years, beyond 10 years ago, I literally have no memory of it, which is weird. I know, it's a freakish thing. So really, I have to search my mind. I think my publishing journey has been a bit odd because I had planned to publish just before COVID. And in fact, I'd written a children's book because at the time I was doing a lot of work with children in schools. And it meant a lot to me to publish this book. And I decided I was going to go down the self-publishing route. It's called Mitch and Mooch Try Swimming. And it's about two twins who are monsters who try to go to swimming lessons, and it's got in there some tips about how to, approach swimming if you're nervous and anxious and things like that, and handy tips about swimming as well. And I was so geared up to launch this book, and it meant such a lot to me. And unfortunately, the day it was due to launch was also the day that we locked down. So it was, as you can imagine, a bit of a flop. It did not splash at all because all the pools were closed, and so everything I'd planned to do around said launch to do with swimming was not possible. So yeah, that was the first story I wrote that meant something to me, because it had, I think probably just because I'd taken it from, just being a silly little idea and tinkering around the edges with it for a while, and then getting it illustrated took forever. Testing it with children took forever, but all for it to sync with COVID.
Yeah, how did you test it with children? Did you sort of have friends that had already had children as well, and they were reading it to their kids?
Yeah,
or what was your...
Absolutely that. I printed off copies of it. It was actually edited by the same editor that what's the name? Liz Pincher. No, that's the wrong name. The Tom Gates books. The editor of the Tom Gates books also edited that. And so I was reasonably confident I was on the right track with it. And then I was doing a lot of work with children in our local school. My children were going there at the time as well. So I test read it with them and checked that they could read it, and talk to them about what they thought about it, without saying I'd written it, obviously, because that would be just a bit weird. And then, friends, children, ran it through some other organisations that were involved with swimming to make sure that the advice I was giving in it was correct and what it should be.
That's a good idea.
So it was a lot of work that went into that, more work bizarrely than a novel, because it was just tested with so many different things, because it's also written in dyslexic friendly font, and it's all captions rather than it's all speech captions in many ways rather than text. So
that's fascinating. So what's I actually don't know about this. What makes a dyslexic friendly font? Is there a particular kind
it's something that's really helpful to about 50% of dyslexics, and it's got slightly different weighting on the letters to make it clearer. So they all, historically, people used to use Comic Sans, because the way that it was, the letters were formed, actually made it a little bit easier to read. More recently, there's various different kinds of dyslexic friendly font, most famously Dyslexie font, which is a sort of a paid for font, and you can get free versions of it as well. If you go onto your Kindle, for example, you'll find it's there. And it does make a difference to approximately 50% of dyslexics. But also you tend to find
wow.
children who have learning disabilities are also going to struggle slightly more with reading. Any kind of learning disability, reading is the number one thing that they actually usually struggle with as well. So it was designed very much with that kind of SEND needs in mind for those children as well, because it's got faces, and things like autistic children, they struggle to identify what expression is being conveyed on a face, what it means, what emotion that facial expression means. So marrying the two together was trying to put that in there as well. It was quite a challenge. Quite fun, but a challenge.
Oh, fascinating. So beyond those books, where would you recommend that the folks listening start reading your body of work?
Okay.
And where should they buy it?
Well, while I was in the process of doing that, I started with book 1 of the Naturae series, which is where you initially met the characters Aoife and Joshua. And that starts in 1535, 1536 in terms of historical time period. So I was writing that as I was dealing with all this other stuff with the children's novel. And that was my first full novel that I wrote with the intention of publishing. But despite the fact that it is book 1 of the series, what actually happened a couple of years later was that I realised I hadn't done an introduction to the characters. I know that sounds really strange, but I was getting questions back from readers about how did my characters meet, because they start off in book 1 as a couple. They're already ostensibly married, and the storyline is that they get separated. So I had readers saying, well, how do they get together? We want the romance. So I actually wrote that as a proper romance book, An Enemies to Lovers, which is called Destiny Awaiting, which is the how they met. And then obviously you can move into the main series, which is their life after getting together. So I would recommend starting with the prequel Destiny Awaiting, which actually was the
and
fourth book
where
I
can
wrote.
people get hold of that? A fourth book, nice.
Yeah, I know. Not quite in sequence.
Where's the best place to purchase from?
So they're all available on. If you go into any bookstore, you can order them. Obviously, they're on Amazon. Both of the prequels, Destiny Awaiting, and there's another prequel as well, which is the kind of like the creation of the villain, which is set in the Viking Age. It's called Risking Destiny, and they're available widely anywhere as an ebook. But all the other books are in Kindle Unlimited, so they're not available widely, unless you want to buy the paperback or the hardback.
Which you should.
Which you should. They look beautiful.
Also, casual reminder to go to your local library and ask them to get a copy of it. And you get to read it. Jan gets supported, and so does your library. Everyone go to your library.
I'm a big library fan. I was a librarian in school, and it's a love I've carried with me forever. So.
Oh, fantastic!
My biggest thrill.
I mean, speaking of libraries,
good segue. Good segue.
Oh, if hypothetically, 2 writer podcastery type guys were being held hostage by a powerful and capricious bibliomancer, and that bibliomancer was hell bent on getting the best stories to put in his magical library, what book would you recommend to that wizard?
Would the hypothetical customers in question have a particular genre that they're fans of? That's the question, or is it just? I
mean, he'll read anything. The hypothetical wizard would read anything.
Hypothetical wizard would read anything. Okay. Okay, that's a great question. You see, I have a very eclectic and wide range of genres that I like to read. From Stephen King to John Grisham. Oh God, loads. I am currently more than a little bit obsessed with magical realism though, because that is what I write essentially. In terms of story, it's very, very tricky. I would say one of my favourite authors for stories at the moment is Ben Aranovic's Rivers of London series.
Yes.
It's like a bit of a go-to for me for magical realism. On the other hand, because I do love my history, I also have to recommend Scott Mariani. I don't know if you're fans of thrillers, but he writes with his character Ben Hope, who is a very, very interesting character. He writes, they are thrillers, but they've got a lot of history involved. So quite often Ben Hope gets sent off on his quest to go and rescue somebody or find something or achieve something or stop a war or something. But there's almost always a historical artifact or location that is tied in with the storyline and forms part of it. So I love that. So yeah, those would be my two authors that I would go to straight away and always recommend.
Two whole authors.
Two, I know.
Maybe they could replace us, not the not us. The hypothetical writers. Don't hurt me, Asteris.
Send help. When you sort of finished your first draft of your books, what is your editing process after that point?
I generally try and tell myself I'm going to walk away from it and leave it and just let it sit for a while. That inevitably fails, and I go back through it with a fine-tooth comb and end up rewriting bits. I'm a bit of a chaotic writer sometimes, so like you're writing a story, even though I am a plantster. I don't know if you know that that's a thing, but it is a thing.
Plants?
A plantster, yeah. It's somewhere
tell us
in
that.
between a plotter and a pantster. So a plotter heavily will plot out exactly what happens and when, where, how, etc. And a pantster will just wing it completely. I'm somewhere in the middle. I kind of vaguely have an idea, roughly have a plot line, but how you get from A to B to C is kind of where the pantster fun comes in, as far as I'm concerned.
For a moment, I thought that was going to be like a new type, like a third type, and it was going to be people that are really good at sowing the seeds of what's going to happen.
That's it. That's why it's called plantster, because you sow the seeds of the plot, but you kind of don't necessarily stick around to watch it grow, because you just crack on with writing it. That's the way I look at it anyway.
I thought you were just going to say that you always plan where your pants are going to be, which is actually one step ahead of how I live. So
it's a useful talent.
Well, I think some people are naturally very, very structurally sound because they read a lot. I think people that read a lot tend to be, and some people are not quite so on it and get the pacing right. I don't trust myself to get the pacing right, so I do some plotting, and I definitely know where my characters are going to end up. I just have to get them there somehow through the plot ish. Nice. Anyway, so my editing process is generally involves going back and filling in plot holes, but I've suddenly realised and twigged that I've got a bit of a problem with that and I need to fix that, or that little detail needs to be inserted. And then I really do try and step away from it a little bit before going back and reading it and rejigging it and rewording it and removing all the crap words that you know you shouldn't put in there, but you do because you're writing, and whittling down those words is I'm an overwriter, and that's part of the problem. And then I have a very, very good friend who is a professional editor, but she's also my beta reader, which is lovely. And so she very kindly reads it for me and tells me where I'm going wrong. I make those corrections, and then I have another two friends who beta read again for me, and tell me where I've still not got it right or tweaked it. And then it goes out to another couple of people who are very, very eagle-eyed for sort of copywriting. It's not copyright, copy editing, and hopefully will pick up any mistakes I've made. And at that point, I'm kind of thinking, right, okay, I should probably get round to actually, launching this and listing it and selling it, maybe.
Absolutely.
I rely heavily on the
So-
kindness of my friends who are actually, as it happens, also qualified and talented. So yeah,
That always helps.
It
That
really
always
does.
helps.
Yeah.
It really does.
It's a big step.
But the other
So
thing is part of the self-editing process I go through. I do have Pro Writing Aid, and I do try and listen to it. So if you play it back with the microphone and stuff, then you can quite often pick up quite a lot of things there, which is particularly pertinent for me being a dyslexic writer. I do find that I've written the wrong word and I just don't see it at all. Just don't see it, but you do hear it.
Yeah.
So it's important, and
I think
that's interesting.
it stands out when you say
we
it.
often say,
But even if I try to read it,
yeah, we
sorry,
that's okay. I was just gonna say we've always said a big part of we read stories out here, and because of that we tend to read them out before we come on. Normally to a significant other is the trick, and it's not until you read things out sometimes that you go, "What the fuck is that sentence structure? That's not how people words work." So yeah, I think having something or someone read it out to you that's a hot tip. Everyone write that down.
Yeah.
Especially for a longer piece as well. Like, if you're talking about something that's 100, 120,000 words, you're going to be blue in the face by the time you've read that out to yourself. So I think that's probably useful for anybody. I think
well,
that
most
most
programs, I mean, I'm not talking about writers that literally write in notebooks, but most programs these days, if you highlight a section and then just press the button, it will read it out to you. So it's quite useful. I write in Scrivener myself, but yeah, that's definitely got it built in there as a read aloud. But Word has it, Google Docs has it, most programs these days do.
And remember, if you're out there and you press the play button and then you get bored listening to it, that's not a good sign. So
well, no, you
go
might
back
get bored
and
listening
make
to
it more engaging.
But it's delivered in a slightly monotonous voice. But that's actually for editing purposes what you need, because it will sound weird when there's a word out of place and it jolts you out of it.
Yeah. In that case, I apologize, robots. You're doing a good job.
You need to be careful. We're approaching the AI event horizon, and they're going to get you, man.
Well, there are AI things
if we're going to talk about
convert your book to audio. Like I think is it Google?
Speaking as a voice actor, don't do that, guys. Come on.
Yeah,
please don't do that. No, it's
I will do it so cheap. I will do it so cheap.
Really, really.
Yeah, hit me up. Hit me up.
No, it doesn't sound right. I mean, my books sound weird spoken. They do, because they're in an AI bot way, and that's why I would never put out an audiobook with them done by an AI bot, because the pronunciation of things is so different.
I mean, especially if you're making up like fantasy words. It's when you say okay, and it's going to be nature and nuturaya. Well, that's not what it says.
And you can't correct it. It's really, really hard to correct it. I think some people have with some programs, but no. I've tried, given up, and gone. No, I'm never going to do this whatsoever. Can't stand it.
So I'm going to ask, as we're floating around it, in light of the advancement and ease of use of AI in content creation, do you feel hopeful or fearful of our future robot overlords?
The future of robot overlords. One of the stories which affected me the most as a child, and I do remember this very, very clearly, was Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And I know it's not supposed to be a horror story, but to me, it was a horror story. I was terrified reading that book, of that vision of that future where people had no, they were born into their particular caste, they were born into the life that they were supposed to have, and they couldn't really escape it. There was no wiggle room whatsoever. And as a vision of the future, that really scared me. AI, I feel, has the potential to do that, to push us into or down into paths where you can't be genuinely creative and AI is seen as being amazing, but it's actually not. It's just a compilation or a rip-off of a vast database of information that it's decided to mangle together. So I'm not the world's biggest fan of it in terms of story creation. I'll be honest with you. I think that the human imagination is far more wide-ranging and has the ability to present things in a completely different way that AI will never, in my opinion, achieve. So from a creative industry point of view, I think it is a problem. However, that said, it does offer the potential to free us up from meaningless tasks that we otherwise would waste time doing. But I yeah, I'm not a big fan, and I find it a bit scary, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think that's probably a fairly widely held belief, that one, and a feeling that's becoming more and more prevalent as more and more people are exposed to this, or various different industries are exposed to AI.
I feel like the author industry is very much coming out against it. It has its use for
hugely, yes.
editing software, for example. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, it might give you some good ideas as long as you don't take it as gospel. But I think there is a backlash now against anything that is written by AI and then presented and published as somebody's work. That's just wrong.
So using it to edit their books, I've not encountered this.
Well, when you go into Google Docs or Word even sometimes, and it offers you a suggestion for how you should better phrase something, that is using AI.
Oh, I see. Right, yeah.
So
yeah,
if you've got Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid or any of those bolt-on things to your word processing, or not so much in Excel, but anything that is written, generally there is some bolt-on that you can have that tries to help you do it better and phrase it better, and that is all pulling from AI more and more. If you ask it to do, like, there's a little symbol on some of these things that is like a sparks or something, that is definitely pulling from AI. Now, I don't have a particular problem with that, but I do have a problem with where it's generating entire books for people, and then they publish them under their names. I think that there's a line somewhere. And actually, on Amazon, when you upload your book, it asks you to say how much AI has been used, and you've got to be very careful when you read the rules of what they're saying. Considers it, what Amazon considers is AI, and what isn't, what is acceptable. So it's acceptable to edit your book in Word, for example, and take their suggestions of editing, like rephrasing. That's acceptable. But when you have it entirely generated, whole sections of it, then that is using AI in not, you only have to declare that. So.
Oh, it's a whole new world, isn't it?
Yeah, it's. I still do it the old-fashioned way. I spend a fortune on chisels and massive slabs of rock, but I'm having a good time with it.
So, who inspired you to start telling your own stories?
There wasn't really anybody. It was about escapism for me. I've always used books as an escape, and stories as an escape, and making up stories as an escape. And I think when I set out in my writing journey, I wanted to escape. I was homeschooling, and I just wanted to be somewhere else. It was during COVID, and I just wanted to be somewhere else, and I just started writing to be somewhere else. And then I realised that the reason I'd been writing to be somewhere else was also what I could offer. And so that's why a lot of my branding is about escaping into a tale, because I think that's what you do. You get invested as a reader in somebody's story, and you enter their world as an escape or a distraction.
I like that a lot. I think that's a really, really nice way to have gotten into it as well.
Yeah.
I mean, even this podcast, to a certain degree, we can sort of conceive the idea in 2019, I think, but it didn't really start properly going until 2020, during which time we were all of a sudden, Nico and I were locked away from each other, couldn't like meet up to do things and all the rest of it. So this was a huge thing for us to be able to come together and tell stories. So I think that really spoke to me, the way that you described that feeling then. It's lovely.
I think it's. Did you, as a dyslexic writer, did you find that there was a point where, and I hope it's not the case, that you thought, well, I like coming up with stories, but I'm not a confident writer, or I'm not practiced as a writer, and like, did you have to fight through that barrier to get to being the jam we've got now?
I think every writer suffers from that to a degree, dyslexic or not. I think everyone has that imposter syndrome as well of, oh, I'm not good enough. And it's only when you do put it out there and you do get good feedback that you sort of think that encourages you to keep going and to, my stories are worth something because somebody's dedicated their time to reading it and then feeding back and saying it's good or it's not good or whatever. I think I appreciate that time investment that readers have. So in terms of me worrying about whether I was good enough because I was dyslexic, no. I used to write a lot of, in a former life, I used to write a lot of business proposals and business plans and pitches and that sort of thing, but in a business context. I used to work for a media company that published magazines. I didn't do writing for them, interestingly enough. I used to run events, but my whole business background was in writing. And when it came to the choice between going back to work, having had maternity leave or not, at the time, my husband and I had a very, very serious discussion about whether I could conceivably go back to doing the job I had been doing, which involved a fair amount of travel around the Northwest and to London as well. And with him working quite a lot in America, and we don't have any childcare near us. So it was sort of a bit of a reluctant decision because I did love my job. I loved compiling these pitches. I loved delivering the projects. I loved managing the team of consultants that I ran to kind of help deliver the projects. And I did like it, and it was a bit gutting to have to make that decision not to go back to it, but it was the right decision. But my husband could see that I was quite kind of, well, what do I do now? I'm used to being a busy person. I'm used to having a purpose and feeling like I have value and I'm delivering something of interest and of support to people. And that was the gap. And he said, what do you actually miss about work? And I said, writing. And he said, well, why don't you just write a book then? Because, I couldn't go back to full-time work because of our situation. Luckily, we were in a position where I don't have to. So, yeah, that was how it started, really, was he said, well, if that's all you miss, then just write a book. Why don't you? I was like, all right, okay, that doesn't sound like too stupid an idea. I'll give it a go. So
that's always the best thing to hear from a significant other. But that doesn't sound like too stupid an idea. That chimes
keeps me busy.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah, very much so. So when you are reading around, other bits of fiction and all the rest of it, what themes do you find particularly appealing in fiction generally?
I think realism. Actually, I know that's not really a theme that you were probably expecting. Maybe you were expecting me to say some tropes in there, but no, I will read anything.
No,
I will read anything, but it has to be realistic. Even fantasy has to be. I'm not good with sci-fi in general because it's just that bit too far for my imagination to kind of properly build the world in my head. So I do like things that are set in, as much as possible, fairly real world. So if I'm reading fantasy, then I do find it has to have that element of based in something I can understand. I'm not good with strange creatures that have never been defined before. I'm really not good with that. Recognizable types and creeds I can get on board with, like, obviously elves and dragons and orcs and that sort of thing. That's fine. but something that I just don't understand how it even looks. I really struggle with. So realism in that sense. What else do I like? Yeah, I tell you what I don't like. Actually, that's a bit of a weird one. I don't like romance. I know I'm gonna
really?
get shot down because I have romantic elements and I have written a romance, but I don't really do YA and I don't really do straight romance, like as in just a romantic novel, boy meets girl or girl meets girl or anything like that. And they go through the curve of meeting and then falling in love and then disaster and then they do get together in the end. Maybe it's because I'm 50 and happily married. I don't know. I just don't find it very interesting anymore to read.
Would it be fair to say, because from what you're saying, it sounds like you don't like the kind of formulaic, like you say, other one meets other. Is it like you don't mind love, but that kind of trite by the numbers romance just doesn't appeal to you at all?
It's absolutely that. It's 100% that. It is the I don't want to have to buck the trend in writing a romance, but I found it really hard sticking to that absolutely to the beat, on the nose structure to write. And even before then, and I hadn't really realised it until I tried to write one, I didn't like the very formulaic structure. And you know what's going to happen, and the twist is how it happens, but blah, 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 blah. I just, it was the structure, it was too structured for me. And actually, with my first attempt at writing a romance, it turned into a tragedy. Which it wasn't. I don't think I'd actually intended for that, but then it just seemed right to do it like that, so I did. And that was why it then became a villain's backstory, because that's
top notch. The other problem with this kind of thing is often it being included as a subplot in a story that otherwise just doesn't need it. I think that's often where I get a bit irritated and sort of like, why is this happening? Like, can we not just get on with the actual story?
Yeah. Well, I had my main series, the Tudor part of it, is about what happens after the happy ever after, because that's more interesting to me. How do you maintain a relationship, and the challenges that adults have? I'm too old and too long in the tooth now to be very interested in teenagers falling in love and thinking that's it, that's the happy ever after, done dusted when the ring's on the finger, that kind of thing. I know different. Sorry. On my second marriage, I know different. It's bloody hard work keeping a relationship going. You face more troubles after you have decided to commit to each other in whatever form that might be than you do actually getting together. But you just don't see that in romance. So I was quite determined, and I deliberately set out to explore the next steps, the trying to maintain a relationship, the challenges that people have as a couple, and it does. Therefore, the series touches on some quite difficult things. So there's loss of a child in there. There's the problems of trying to conceive. There's found family, and building a family around you because you've got no relatives near you. Building a family out of your friends and the people that you should be relying on. There's sort of dynasty building, I suppose, as well. It's that those are the things that interest me personally, and are more relevant to my stage of life than person meets person, fall in love, happy ever after. It's the happy ever after, not necessarily so happy.
Yeah, there's only so many, abs like sheer cliffs and he was 6'8", she was 5'2", with an incredibly petite form but enormous but unnoticeable breasts, and they fell immediately in love with each other due to their extreme competence. I haven't got any energy for that.
Extreme competency fantasies.
I think it's very hard to do that well and keep it fresh as well. I have respect for romance authors because churning out time and time again the same kind of characters and plot within the same structure and keeping it fresh is tricky. It's hard enough to do in the first place, but to keep it interesting and different that your readers buy the next book, even though it's basically the same story. That's
And
I was trying to think about a good example of a depiction in fiction and in sort of quite traditional romance sort of style novels of a long-term relationship, as you were saying. These what happens after the happily ever after and stuff. I think it is largely just the purview of typically the parents of the characters that are in love. That's normally the way that is examined, isn't it? I'm thinking in particular about Pride and Prejudice with the Bennets and that god awful marriage that they have, where she often takes to her bed and he deliberately winds her up, and it's just a really unpleasant image. There's some kindness and some true sort of cherishing outlooks going on under there, but it is by and large you just sort of like, oh god, this doesn't look good, does it?
I agree with you. It's an
wow.
underutilized
Good answer.
sort of, I want to say trope, but it isn't a trope because not enough people do it. Discovery of Witches series has the first book is about Diana and Matthew getting together, and is very much along the romance lines, although the structure of it is so subtle you don't really notice it, which is a skill. Trust me, that's a real skill. But the following books, the other two in the trilogy, and then there's other sort of side books that continue along their story as they go, and they have children, and obviously they're dealing with much bigger pictures things. I don't know if you've read them, but she's a witch and he's a vampire, so it's but they are a couple, and their fight is to stay together throughout all of the ups and downs of their turbulent life. So that's the only other one I can think of that does that, follows that couple.
I think if anybody's listening and has some good examples, it'd be good to hear from you as well, because I think it's important to notice it. I think, isn't it? Because as you say, the teenagers getting together thing is a bit dull. Let's move on.
I'll always say Sam and Sybil. That's my last statement on that one.
Oh Sam and Sybil in Discworld.
If you know, you know. What are you working on next?
Okay, so at the moment I am writing a short story. I have a series of shorter novellas that are part of the Nature series that kind of focus on the side characters a bit. So unusually though, this one is about my two main characters, and it is a short story because it's just about their wedding, which sounds weird, but they don't actually get married in any of the other books. They're just a couple, or getting together as a couple. Yeah. So I thought I'd do a little Christmassy wedding vibe, except it's not really, because they're the proposal, they haven't got around to the proposal yet, because the proposal has been interrupted by a historical character or historical figure, Margaret Beaufort. So for those history purists among you, you may or may not be aware, but Margaret Beaufort is the mother of Henry Tudor. So this takes place slap bang in the middle of the Wars of the Roses, and it's just a short little, not quite a love story because it's a proposal, but adventure with her 6 months pregnant at the point when her husband Edmund Tudor has just been, he's just died, and she's escaping. So I've imagined her having to flee where she is because people are coming after her, which is totally feasible and totally what happened.
I think that's really exciting. I really love historical fantasy, so you just hooked me then, because I like that a lot. Do you sort of, not to give anything away, but do you sort of go into her remarrying and how that creates the power base that Henry Tudor launches from?
Yes, in a sense of, she is, I mean, you may or may not know, she's the one that was already a widow by the time that she married Edmund Tudor, and she wasn't. She had already been promised to someone else, and that promise was dissolved. so that she could then marry Edmund Tudor at the age of, I think she was 12. By the age of 13, she was pregnant and he had died of the plague. So my particular story picks up just then at that point when she finds out that he's died. But she really did have a sense of her own worth even at that young age. She was quite unusually given the choice of whether to marry Edmund Tudor by King Henry at the time, who was a cousin, not close cousin, but a cousin. And she was already an heiress and knew that she was worth a lot of money, and with her money and lands and estates, that basically would give whoever married her and therefore got that a huge advantage. So I'm coming into the story from the viewpoint that she, even at that age, is quite, she knows her own worth. She's privileged and she knows it, and she knows that she is therefore a target. And the way I've twisted it a little bit in my story is that she gets a prophecy from a witch that the baby is destined to be king. But in actual fact, I think in the roots of history, she was probably already, well aware of the value of an heir, definitely, and well aware that the Tudor brothers were very much favoured by the Lancastrians as well. She was herself very well connected in terms of her family lineage, was already quite kind of, senior and royal anyway. So she knew that she had a decent claim, or her child would have a decent claim anyway. And I think that was what the impetus was. And in my story, that's very much a part of it, that she's, she gets this prophecy and she's determined to do what she can to sort of escape from the people that are pursuing her.
That's really exciting. Any story that sort of has the trajectory towards Bosworth, it has my vote, so I'm into it in a big way. There's even a bit in the Shakespeare play, isn't there, about how Henry Tudor is visited by like a spectre the night before the Battle of Bosworth, and sort of it's like the spectre of England sort of telling him that he will be king. So I wonder if there's like a connection to the Beauforts being prophesied by a witch as well.
There is in some of the historical research, I found that she was in fact when she was offered the choice of who to marry by King Henry, Margaret this is, she spoke to a mysterious lady who helped her make up her mind to choose the Tudor, and that mysterious lady has never been identified. But she then says that she had a vision herself. She had a dream, and in the dream, she was marrying Edmund Tudor.
Some sort of kingmaker witch on the prowl. I like it.
And she's here tonight. Come on in, kingmaker witch.
I like to, where I can, just give a little nod to the actual history. It's all of my magic is based on historical fact as well. So yeah.
That's very cool.
It's just nice to be mentioned.
Somebody will know me. You will know my name. Yeah.
No, it's Henry in a wig. We all know.
It's always Henry in a wig. So, just it's been wonderful telling stories with you, and also to hear your take on storytelling. But just a final question: where should people go to keep up to date with your news and on all the rest of it?
I would love some visitors to my website, which is www.escapeintoatale.com, and you can follow me on socials at Jan Foster Author. And if you're interested in keeping up with the latest news, then I also do a monthly newsletter, which will also earn you a free copy of Destiny Awaiting, which is the prequel where you introduce to the characters, Aoife and Joshua, at Agincourt. So that's quite a fun one. Yes, it's a romance, I know what I've said, but it is. But it's not like a romance that you would probably recognise in some ways, because halfway through my characters are, guess what, torn apart. So yeah, there's a bit of a fight because Aoife is stuck in Harfleur, which is under siege, and Tarl/Joshua, as he later becomes, is on Henry V's side, trying desperately to reach her. I should say that they're Fae. I probably didn't mention that.
Oh,
yeah,
they're Fae.
yeah, they're
There
not
you go.
human characters. They're Fae, and they come from this mythical world of Naturae, which is actually an island off the top of Scotland. Is part of the Orkney Islands. So there's a lot of kind of lore in there: Viking lore, Scottish lore, fairy tale lore as well as history. So yeah. Anyway, I would love to connect with my readers. I love chatting to them, and I love hearing their news. I get readers sending me emails back from my newsletter, which is always wonderful. Just
nice.
Yeah, it's nice to talk.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. It's been delightful to talk to you.
Likewise,
And
thank
I
you.
hope to talk to
Thank
you
you for
again
having
soon.
me so much.
You've been a lovely
It's
time.
been lovely, and thank you for making me write a story completely out of my normal thing. It's sort of
Making you? Oh no!
Making me is the wrong word. You're right there.
Yeah, we didn't even get out the hammer.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?